As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Biden told donors at a fundraising event, quote, Israel's security can rest on the United States, but right now it has more than the United States. It has the European Union, it has Europe, it has most of the world supporting it. But they're starting to lose that support by the indiscriminate bombing that's taking place, end quote. So despite labeling the Israeli campaign as indiscriminate, Biden said the U.S. will continue to provide military assistance, which involves shipping all these bombs over there, all sorts of military equipment. Biden said, quote, the literal security of Israel as an independent Jewish state is literally at stake, but it is unshakable, our commitment to Israel. We continue to provide military assistance to Israel as it goes after Hamas, end quote. So Biden said that Netanyahu justified his slaughter in Gaza by pointing to U.S. and allied bombings in World War II. And as that story I covered yesterday said, the destruction in northern Gaza is comparable to the most heavily bombed German cities of World War II. That's really incredible. I mean that in a bad way. It's incredible in a horrible way. Biden, so it's just interesting to see Biden say this. So he said, quote, it was pointed out to me that by Bibi that, well, you carpet bombed Germany, you dropped the atom bomb, a lot of civilians died, end quote. So that's what Biden said Netanyahu told him. And Biden said he replied by saying, quote, that's why all these institutions were set up after World War II to see that it didn't happen again, end quote. And Biden added that Israel should also not repeat the same mistakes the U.S. made after 9/11 and said the U.S. should never have fought the war in Afghanistan, which is a pretty interesting thing to hear a president say. That Israel's military has begun pumping seawater into Hamas's vast complex of tunnels in Gaza. And the move to flood the tunnels with water from the Mediterranean Sea is one of several techniques that Israel is using to try to clear and destroy the tunnels. Israeli officials say the Hamas's underground system has been key to its operations on the battlefield. And these U.S. officials speaking to the Wall Street Journal are saying that Israel has not done much damage to the tunnels. And using the seawater, again, there's going to be other ways. They're saying that flooding the tunnels with seawater will take weeks, likely be a weeks-long progress. And some Biden administration officials are concerned that using the seawater could endanger Gaza's fresh water supply. It could also impact farming and things like that. So, again, this is just a report from the Wall Street Journal. I know Biden was asked about it, and his response was, what about the hostages? Or he referred to the hostages. And that is a good question because the hostages are probably down in the tunnels. So flooding them with seawater could definitely put them in danger. So the U.S. is threatening to kill a peace plan for Yemen that was negotiated between the Houthis and the Saudis if the Houthis continue attacking shipping in the Red Sea, which the group has been doing in response to Israel's assault on Gaza. So The Guardian reported that the Houthis and Saudis have reached a peace deal that could satisfy all major parties involved in the conflict, even the Southern Transition Council. They're a UAE-backed group that wants to see the restoration of North and South Yemen as two separate countries, as they were before Yemen was unified in 1990. So the Southern Transition Council, that's the STC, they want to restore South Yemen, and they want to be, separate South Yemen from North Yemen, which there were two separate countries until 1990. And the territory that the Houthis control is pretty much all of what used to be North Yemen. And so, it sounds like splitting up the countries again could be a deal. I don't really see what the problem is because you have two groups that control most of the territory who, I don't think mind being separated. So the peace plan has been presented to the UN, but the details have not been disclosed to the public. I was not aware that there was actually kind of a deal that they reached and gave to the UN. According to The Guardian, the agreement involves 3 phases, and a potential U.S. plan to redesignate the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization could prevent the first phase from being implemented. The first phase involves depositing money into accounts for the payment of civil salaries for workers in Houthi-controlled areas, and also it would fully open airports and seaports that have been under blockade since 2015. A U.S. terrorist designation would mean that any entity that does business with the Houthis would be subject to U.S. sanctions, making both steps impossible to implement without the parties involved facing penalties. So the White House said last month that it was considering redesignating the Houthis as terrorists in response to the attacks in the Red Sea and the Houthi missile and drone launches toward Israel. The Trump administration labeled the Houthis as terrorists in January 2021. It was kind of a last-minute foreign policy move by Mike Pompeo. He did it despite all these aid groups warning that it would doom the food-deprived Yemenis living in Houthi-controlled areas. The Trump administration did it anyway. Biden came in, and they reversed it pretty quickly. In February 2021, it was reversed. So the Houthis, again, they govern the Yemeni capital of Sana'a and the territory that used to be North Yemen. And it's where 70 to 80% of Yemen's population lives. So it's where most Yemenis live. So kind of criminalizing the delivery of aid to those areas could be very bad, obviously. And civilians in Houthi-controlled territory have faced dire food shortages due to the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war and blockade that started in 2015. According to the UN, the war has killed at least 377,000 people. More than half died due to starvation and disease caused by the siege.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
George Washington said, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." And Ukraine is very fucking foreign. And in your Trends Journal back in 2014, we wrote about the United States overthrow of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych. Oh, who wrote the article? Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Washington is driving the world to the final war. Ukraine presented a perfect opportunity for Washington to advance its hegemonic agenda. In a speech at the National Press Club last December, meaning December 13th, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland boasted that Washington had invested $5 billion in Ukraine for the purpose to teach democracy. Stealing more of our fucking money to teach democracy and put in a crime syndicate in the most corrupt country in Europe. Oh no. Hey, McCain or Kane. Yeah, McCain, Mickey fucking Mouse. According to the Ukrainian people in the last poll, other than the war, 89% of the people are concerned about corruption in Ukraine. So, Washington goes on to say, the nation which indulges toward another in habitual hatred, like we're taught to hate Iran, we're taught to hate Russia, we're taught to hate Cuba, or an habitual fondness, oh, we love Ukraine, we love Israel, is in some degree a slave. Yep, and that's all we are plantation workers on the global plantation of Slavelandia, run by the fucking arrogant shits in office and the fucking bigs that own everything. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interests. Got that, Kane boy? Oh, I'm in the military intelligence, which is an oxy-fucking-moron. You guys got no intelligence. You're a bunch of losers. You haven't won a war since World War II. You killed millions of people and stole hundreds of trillions of dollars of our money to do it. Calm down, Salenti. Be a fucking sucker. Bend over and take the shit like the rest of them. Washington goes on to say, Kane, a passionate attachment to one nation or another produces a variety of evils. Sympathy for the favorite nation, facilitating the illusion of an imaginary common interest in cases where no real common interests exist. Oh, what are you talking about? If we don't stop those Russians, they're going to take over Europe. Just like the same fucking shit they said when I was a kid, young man, with the Vietnam War. Those dominoes going to keep falling. And infusing into one the enmities of the other, betrays the former into a participation in the quarrels of war of the latter without adequate inducement or justification. Against the insidious vials of foreign influence, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience proves that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of the Republican government. He doesn't mean the Republicans, it's a republic, America. All right? That's George Washington that this clown is bragging about, that will love America to steal hundreds of billions of dollars of our money to give to them to keep murdering people and murdering more people in Gaza as the United States votes against a ceasefire. But again, the General Assembly just voted for a ceasefire just a couple hours ago in the UN, but it means nothing. So here's that thing. This Tim Kaine. President Zelensky spoke to the Senate today about the critical role of American support for Ukraine democracy. Who the fuck you talking to? What democracy you talking about? The fucking little prick said there's no presidential election this year. But there's this shit that they throw out that the morons and imbeciles swallow. He stood beneath the portrait of George Washington, who helped birth an American free of domination by a great power, a moving moment. But he didn't read the other stuff about George Washington that I said. And again, we're looking at all the money that America is sending to keep bloodying the killing fields. And it's just going to get much, much worse.
What I know is that the future of the world is at stake. If we fail, if Republicans don't get reasonable in the next 24 to 48 hours, Russia is going to march into Ukraine. China is going to be given a green light to invade Taiwan. The world for my children is fundamentally different under that scenario. The United States security is at risk.
Other threats might include hyperbole, hysterical rhetoric designed to prevent you being able to think straight, and it seems also to continue to legitimize the funding of an unwinnable war. Unwinnable. So I don't know why Anthony Blinken is using phrases like win-win.
90% of the security assistance we provided has actually been spent here in the United States with our manufacturers, with our production, and that's produced more American jobs, more growth in our own economy. So this has also been a win-win that we need to continue.
What they mean by that is that it's economically been valuable. He's essentially there just admitted that the money for the military aid has remained in the US, generating jobs. That old favourite argument, if you let the billionaire class continue to make money, you might get a few scraps. And now a Christmas message from Joe Biden. Give us more money for our wars, otherwise we're going to start killing your children.
Putin attacks a NATO ally. If he keeps going, and then he attacks a NATO ally, well, we've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory.
Now listen to this. We're all members of NATO, and there's no way of ever undoing that. There's no way of sort of saying that NATO might be a thing that we don't need anymore, seeing as how the whole thing was just set up to tackle the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist now. But it's sort of giving you all of these premises and promises, but actually, we're on a very narrow bandwidth of potential options. We're in NATO. Could we leave NATO? Shut up. And we've said that we're going to protect all NATO territory. Do we have to do that? Shut up. And Putin definitely going to attack other NATO companies. Is he though? Shut up. So can we have your money or we're going to kill your children? Bloody hell. Yeah, I mean, if that's the only alternative to a dictatorship, shut up.
Biden's budget director, the head of the OMB, sent a letter yesterday to Speaker Mike Johnson, imploring him to spend more money in Ukraine. And what they said is they want to revitalize our defense industrial base. That's the new acronym, DIB, for the MIC, the Military Industrial Complex. And they sent a list of states that would get money when we spend, money on deadly munitions, because they have to be manufactured in Alabama or Ohio or Texas. And so, they're saying the quiet part out loud, that congressmen tend to vote for this stuff because a lot of this federal spending that goes to Ukraine is actually laundered back to the military industrial complex. And in some ways, not very efficiently, but in some ways, it enriches people in their districts and the stockholders, some of whom are congressmen.
Amazing. Now you see why there is such a requirement for censorship, because the way that the media functions now with figures like Tucker on X and other comparable voices, you could just say, do you reckon that these people in Congress owning stocks and shares is influencing them, or their ability to say it's improving their local economies in their states? Do you think that might be a factor other than, of course, this humanitarian motive that we keep hearing so much about on CNN and MSNBC? That is why censorship laws are so important, because you have to starve the media space of the oxygen of opposition. That's what's happening. And believe me, they'll go to extraordinary lengths to shut down dissenting voices. Many thousands have died needlessly in the unnecessary, unwinnable, and increasingly unaffordable war in Ukraine. What a slogan. It's unwinnable. It's unnecessary. It's unaffordable. It's the war in Ukraine. And just to give you some perspective, ringside, here's Vitaly Klitschko. We're turning our own country into Russia. Shut up, you. Get Nancy Pelosi. The financial assistance and energy subsidies the war has cost Europe and the United States totals more than the annual GDP of Maryland. And this at a time when America's own national debt is already 120% of our GDP. These costs might have been worth paying if Ukraine were a democracy, but it's not. Oh. Democracies do not ban opposition parties. Although, in America, more and more, if you vote for anyone other than this, get used to that rhetoric, Trump's a dictator. The fact that so many such parties ever existed says something about the level of opposition faced by the Ukrainian nationalist government that came to power after the 2014 revolution. Then, in May of 2022, the Ukrainian parliament passed a law formally banning all these parties. President Volodymyr Zelensky signed the law. The list included the opposition Platform for Life, which had held fully 10% of the seats in parliament. The catalogue of authoritarian abuses is growing in Ukraine and shows little sign of slowing under the guidance of the West's favourite autocrat, Zelensky. It has created a state-controlled church, taken control of all television news and banned major opposition parties. This far exceeds anything that occurred in recent American or British history. Both of those nations remained fundamentally democratic during war, even a civil war. This latest cancellation of presidential elections in Ukraine destroys any pretense that we are supporting a functioning democracy. It also illustrates to me the important fact that we tend to organise information in a way that's convenient to our agenda. There will be people that just will go, no, but he's having to do that because of this and because of that, because of the other. But I think now, this is the side I'm firmly down on. Whatever is publicly being said by the establishment about the perpetuation of this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, it is ultimately because of US financial interests and globalist interests. And actually, I'm kind of sick of the type of politics where anyone from the left or right or anywhere stands up and says, this is what we should be doing.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. Doesn't matter how many lemmings you get out there on the street begging for them to have their guns taken. We will not relinquish them. Do you understand? And that's why you're going to fail, and the establishment knows no matter how much propaganda, the Republic will rise again when you attempt to take our guns.
My point is there a line on free speech at all for you?
For me personally, no.
Nothing?
No. I think that Alex Jones should be able to go on Twitter. If they want him there, then that's fine. They can have him there and he can...
Do you think what he said about the Sandy Hook massacre was justified then?
Justified? Like, he has the right to say it. I wouldn't say it was justified.
I mean, $1.2 billion worth of damages awarded against him for one of the most serious
biggest civil suit against an individual in the history of America.
One of the worst defamations, actually, in terms of damages America's ever seen. Damages and defamations are protected by the First Amendment, and yet you think he was entitled to say it?
I think he had a right to say it.
He had a right to say that a mass shooting that killed 20 young kids was a fake and a hoax, that the parents of the grieving dead were crisis actors. These were statements which he repeatedly made, which led to actual intimidation, harassment, death and rape threats, and people in the street going up to these people and confronting them, these parents. You think all that is fine?
I don't think it's fine. I never said it's fine. I said he has a right to do it.
So you actually think he has a right to do what he did, with the consequences we now know happened?
Yes, basically, a bunch of nutters did do a lot of awful stuff after the fact, but that's basically going down the same route of, remember back in the 90s, they wanted to ban video games and Dungeons and Dragons because they thought it caused violence and devil worship. Or you can't, engage with this type of, media, otherwise it's going to cause X, Y, Z, like rap music causes violence, all that other nonsense. If we're saying, this guy's not allowed to say his conspiracy theories or whatever you want to call them because some crazy guy out there might do something mental, then nobody can talk about anything at all.
3 cheers for Count Decula. Hip hip hooray! Or whatever you guys say over there. He's right. He's obviously right. Was Alex right about what he was saying? No, probably not. Does he have a right to say it? Yes. You bet your ass he does, Piers. You fucking pussy. Yeah, man, just really think about what it amounts to if you're able to sue or deplatform people who are trying to figure out shit that we don't know for sure. Like, honest to God, you have every newscaster in America repeated the CIA lie that Saddam Hussein had WMDs. And for that, over 1 million innocent Iraqis died. 1 million deaths because of the lies that people like Piers Morgan repeated without a second thought. Should he be charged with, I don't know, accessory to murder? Accessory to mass murder? Because he did not critically think, because he repeated something that in hindsight ended up being wrong? Because that's the door that this opens up. If Alex Jones can't theorize about a handful of mass shootings in America, which, by the way, there's plenty of reason to think that there are mass shootings in America that could be false flags. Vegas comes to mind. Let's be honest. That Vegas story was fucking bizarre, and we may never know the truth of it. But what came of it? Well, they banned bump stocks, and then that story went away, and we've never really discussed it since. But we don't know what the fuck happened that day. Very unlikely that some professional gambler who played, I think it was video game poker on a computer screen, which is not a great game to play if you are playing for skill as a professional, right? It's a pretty fucking dumb way to try and make a living. So it looks like the guy was money laundering. It looks like he was laundering wherever he actually got his real revenue through these machines so that then he could clean his cash, because then it's taxable and then you can pay taxes on it and then the government leaves you alone. That's what I think he was doing as a professional gambler. And more than likely, he was a gun runner for the CIA. That's my honest opinion. I don't know it for a fact, but, I guess I could be sued for $1 billion for thinking maybe that's what happened, given that the broad narrative about it is complete and utter bullshit. Just seems like completely nonsensical. This dude's responsible for murdering 60 plus people from a fucking a window at the, what was it? I think it was Mandalay Bay. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And there's a lot more that goes into this that I could spend an entire multiple episodes on breaking all this down. But the point of bringing it up is just to say, if we can't question shit like that, like, I'm not saying that the people that were shot were crisis actors. I think genuinely that 60 plus people were murdered. It's terrible. But I don't think that one dude who was some dude with no track record, no criminal history, who was a professional gambler, who had no motive whatsoever, just did that. I don't buy it. Sorry. I don't. Can I say that? Is it okay if I say that? Can the victims of that event all sue me for trillions of dollars? Because I think that story doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. Does the Sandy Hook story make sense all the way around? In my opinion, no, it doesn't. Could it be exactly what the media has reported? Sure, it might be. I don't know. But I think if you live in a free country, you have to be able to question stories. And I'm not talking about minor stories. I'm talking about major stories that are used as catalysts to try and remove our God-given rights. Not rights that are granted by the government, but rights that are enshrined as being outside of the purview of the government per the Bill of Rights. We have these rights. You can't infringe upon them. But they try to with every single mass shooting. So what does the precedent set do? What does the $1 billion civil judgment against Alex Jones really do? It makes it so that every single talking head out there like me becomes horrified to speak out and question any narrative that has anything to do with a mass shooting. You see that? I mean, this is not a big stretch here. Everybody that's got anything to lose is looking at that judgment going, holy shit. I will never question another shooting as long as I'm alive.
First of all, let's talk about a central bank digital currency. Here in South Carolina, Senate Bill 861 was just filed in the South Carolina Senate and would expressly exclude a central bank digital currency, CBDC, from the definition of money in South Carolina, creating potentially significant roadblocks to its use as such in the states. Similar legislation has already been signed as law in both Indiana. Indiana was first, and then Florida just this year in 2023. Now, in short, the more that states do stuff like this, the more obstacles and lawsuits and just stuff that the feds are going to have to deal with, more pushback. The more that we put roadblocks in their way, the less likely it is that they'll be able to pull this off. And I've got an example at the end of how the financial system, they're trying to use credit cards to basically do surveillance on people who purchase firearms, but by putting roadblocks in the way like this, very similar to this, we've at least been able to put that program on hold. So the more that the feds have to go through to implement, they still might pull it off, but it's less likely they'll do it. That's exactly what James Madison told us in Federalist number 46. So Senate Bill 861 in South Carolina takes a step against a central bank digital currency because we know if no one does anything to oppose it, they are guaranteed going to shove that thing down our throats, no matter what anybody tells you. The only way you can stop it is by doing stuff to try to stop it. A very similar piece of legislation was filed in Missouri just at the beginning of this month, Senate Bill 826. So it also removes, if it passes, it would remove a central bank digital currency from the definition of money. And therefore, Missouri would be saying, well, you can't use it as money within the state. Well, there's no contractual requirements, whatever. We're not going to enforce it in court, etc. But from Mike Meharry's report on this, the legislation would go a step further than other states with an additional provision to prohibit a state or local government agency from accepting CBDC as payment. It would also prohibit any public entity from participating in a test of a CBDC by the Federal Reserve, because of course they're going to go through a testing process, and the less organizations, and the less states, and the less governments that participate, and the less people that decide to use it. Ultimately, this all gets down to the people. If the people go along with this in large numbers, then nothing's going to stop it. Again, it gets down to, first of all, the people have to refuse to participate, refuse to comply, and then the actions of the states have some or more impact. So Senate Bill 826 was filed in Missouri, and that's efforts to stop states from participating in the enforcement of federal gun control. The number of federal gun control measures that should exist under the Constitution is zero. That includes the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, and everything since. Of course, the Undetectable Firearms Act, etc., etc. And the ATF has only about 3,700 employees throughout the country. The record amount of enforcement actions that they've been able to complete is somewhere between 10 and 11,000 per year. That's 10 to 11,000 too many. But if you think of it this way, if there's 13 million undocumented short-barreled rifles, all in so-called violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934, which shouldn't exist, the ATF shouldn't exist, well, there's no way they're going to be able to do anything about it. So the more that states opt out of doing enforcement actions for the ATF, because almost every ATF enforcement action is in conjunction with state and local law enforcement, oftentimes with the DEA as well, the less that they participate, the more that it is likely that the people and the states can win. So in Ohio, there are a number of states that have taken action along these lines, pushing the ball forward. The big one, of course, that most people know about is Missouri. It's a very complex law, so it landed in court. We don't want it to go in court, so that's the most effective one. I think in practice, there's also Montana, Kentucky, Arizona, and in some small steps, Idaho, but you have to keep pushing forward. You can't just rest once you get step one done. You got to keep pushing forward. So hopefully we'll see more from those states. But in Ohio, House Bill 51, also the Second Amendment Preservation Act, modeled after Missouri, but with some updates and changes in the legal language to make it less likely to have to go through a court case, would ban state and local law enforcement officers from enforcing, attempting to enforce, or participating in the enforcement of any federal acts, executive orders, administrative orders, rules, regulations, statutes, or ordinances regarding firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition that are not mirrored in state law. A good step forward. It had a lot of pushback from some establishment types. It finally got passed out of committee by a vote of 7-5 in November. We were told a number of times that this was coming to the floor, since I think the Speaker of the House is in support, but there's some other people who have some power, and the establishment red team people have some power. It was supposed to come for a vote. It was supposed to go to a vote last week, Wednesday, and then they did a parliamentary move at the last second, said, nope, we're not going to do it. And then so it was supposed to come to a vote again today. I think this might be the last day of the session for the year where they're able to do floor action without some type of emergency parliamentary move. And yesterday, they pulled kind of a parliamentary move where they kicked it back to committee, making it very unlikely that it'll get passed. But I want to point out that it is generally the establishment red team, along with their financial backers in law enforcement lobby groups, that fight most aggressively against this type of legislation. So it's very important to know that. You definitely, if you live in Ohio, you definitely want to let your state representatives know that you support House Bill 51. In case it doesn't get through today and doesn't get through maybe in one more try in the next month, then we want to get another round at this, another crack at it again. Anyway, so that's the Second Amendment Preservation Act in Ohio, and we expect to see a number of other states consider similar legislation in 2024. Just none have been filed as of yet. So
And I keep thinking of the comparison of the Kennedy assassination and even the understanding of 9/11. You know, and time reveals that people will change their minds slowly as the evidence creeps out. And that, of course, is sad because I think that when I see all these tragedies, you know, what do we do now? We're involved in a tragic event going on in Ukraine. We're involved with weaponizing the people who are doing a lot of killing, you know, in Palestine.
Yeah.
So it's that incident that get us involved that makes me upset because we shouldn't be doing it, and we're broke. You know, we shouldn't be doing it under the law, the Constitution. We shouldn't be doing it because we don't have the money, and we shouldn't be doing it because it's very, very dangerous to us. And yet they do it, and then they say, oh, what are we going to do? There's a crisis, like in this example. This is the crisis of the First Amendment on what's going on. And of course, it all has, you know, important discussion, but it's sort of after the fact, when it was just the prevention. When I think of what the founders did, they were trying to prevent this, and there were a lot of thou shalt nots in the Constitution, but they forgot it in that, and this is why we're in this mess. But I think we're facing and we're seeing a reflection of moral bankruptcy and financial bankruptcy and coming together, and people are scared and they don't quite understand it, and that's the most important thing that we can do is to help them to understand why this has happened rather than saying, send me more government, you know, because that will not solve the problem.
You know, who knows? Part of me cynically wonders if the deep state is not taking a move and saying, we got to get Joe out. His numbers are in the tank. The guy is definitely not operating on all cylinders. There's no question about that. We got to get this guy out. We've been saying this for a while, so you know we could be wrong, but I just kind of wonder if the deep state's not making a move on it.
Isn't it interesting? They impeached Trump twice, but they never had a proper vote, you know, to authorize it by the Congress, which would have been a pretty good idea. And I think that's the law. But this time the Republicans seem to be wanting to follow those rules, and they're serious about it. But we'll have to see because. there will be a lot of obstacles. It's pretty hard for Trump to win many legal cases, with the saturation of the Justice Department and the FBI and the rest of them who tend to gang up on anybody that think they should have fairness delivered to Trump.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Here's a couple of tweets just to show. If you do the next one, this is what RNC Research, obviously a biased source, but they're often clever and funny. Put this up. Hunter Biden moves the goalposts again. My father was not financially involved in my business. That's going to be a hard sell. I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there. Maybe it's right. It's hard to believe that a guy like Hunter could just emerge out of nowhere. If he were born to a humble family in Iowa or something, could have emerged to be this amazing businessman, particularly with his private activities seemingly compromising his business sense. And then just to give credit to Zero Hedge, we stole their headline, so we got to give them some credit because it's pretty funny, and they're often very funny and sarcastic. We'll put that next one up, if you don't mind that next clip. Here he goes. I did not have financial relations with that father. It's 30, almost 30 years now since Clinton uttered that, and it's now kind of entered the lexicon. So we'll see what's happening. But speaking of Biden, Dr. Paul, we'll move on to our second story. Biden is finding himself in a serious bind on the Gaza stuff. I'm going to put on this next clip. This is Dave DeCamp. Great article, as usual, great summary of what's going on. I had a chat with our friend Eric Garris this morning, and he said, have a look at this. I'd already read it. Biden says Israel's Gaza bombing campaign is indiscriminate, but he vows to keep supporting it. So this is the bind he's in. He's now been forced, and I have some poll numbers later. You know how much I love those, Dr. Paul. He's been forced now to say, you guys, you're killing so many civilians. Can you please knock it off? By the way, here's some more money. Here's some more missiles to do it.
Well, it can get a little depressing. You pointed out to me this article about Mersheimer.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have read it, even
Sorry
though I knew
about
it,
that,
because it's so depressing.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, is this true? And I know it's true. Mersheimer isn't going to write garbage.
No, he's a very serious guy.
And he even starts his article by saying, he doesn't expect to change the world, but he wanted to be recorded.
Yeah.
And I understand exactly the feeling. So, but it was so depressing, and because it really challenges what's going on in here. How can you criticize Israel at the time they're special? And that's more or less what Biden said. They criticize the bombing, but we have to keep supporting it. So it's on and on. It's sort of a religious dedication. In many ways, there is a religious dedication, and you can't challenge it. But that is so difficult. But the violence there, it's just so sickening. And when does it come outrageous and everybody say it must stop? Essentially, when the original Holocaust, or the one everybody talks about, most people didn't say, oh, there was a division. There was
pros and cons. Yeah.
But now there is a division on this, even though you're expected. Sometimes you wonder how can they have this sustaining ability to go through the violence over there. I mean, this is just pretty horrible. Whole concern is, why can't we live in peace? And of course, it's where the power and the authority and the propagandists are. They say, well, we have a majority vote here, and a majority says you have to do ABC regardless, and they don't have a basic moral principle. Like maybe they ought to say, what is this non-interventionist stuff?
Yeah.
You mean the government just should stay out of our lives, and they should stay out of regulating the economy? They should stay out of regulating the interest rates? And should we stay out of the internal affairs of other nations? They don't go to that point, but someday they better, because we won't. That one article we quoted there showed that we're involved in all these wars. We finance it. If we quit doing it, the war is going to stop.
Wow.
It's probably no more difficult than that.